On the real estate show, I talk a lot about buying and selling houses. But what if you see something like this? What about renting a house, or especially renting an apartment? It's the real estate show. Welcome to the Real Estate Show. My name is Rick Naples, owner-broker of Zone Realty LLC. You zone your home. Today I'm talking about rentals. You know, sometimes that's the best way to go for you. You're not ready to purchase a home, or you don't own a home that you're looking to sell, or you're selling your home and you're not ready to buy another home and you're going to be looking to rent. So what's involved? What do you need to do? Well, it's the same procedure as when you're looking for a house. You're going to be looking at the different sources that are out there as far as what's listed and what is available to rent, price range that you want to be in, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and etc. But when you do find a place that you're going to go take a look at, what happens next? Let's discuss that for a moment. Most apartment buildings, apartment complexes, or even privately owned properties are going to require you as a prospective tenant to fill out an application. Now, when you fill out these applications, you want to fill them out as completely as you possibly can. Some companies have the ability of taking the information and pulling reports, whether they be credit reports or background searches, to verify the information you've put on the application. So you don't necessarily have to be too detailed as far as account numbers are concerned, or even balances in bank accounts and so on and so forth, because it will show up on reports. But you do want to fill out the more important information. Obviously, your name and your current address is very important to fill out on the application. If you're currently in an apartment and you're renting, you want to make sure you give the new potential landlord the information about the old landlord. In other words, who are you renting from? How much was your rent? How long have you been there? What was the address that you were renting? And so on and so forth. This is really important because this is background that the potential landlord is going to be researching to decide whether or not you are a viable tenant to rent that property. Now, there's also going to be a form that's called a credit authorization form. What this is a form that you're going to sign that allows the landlord or the representative company, whether it may be a real estate agency or a property management company, to pull a credit report. Now, the credit reports that are pulled, sometimes are combined credit reports, sometimes they're local credit reports, but that information becomes very important to the landlord in the decision process. So they'll have the application that you filled out and an authorization to pull credit. They'll pull the credit report and background search, and they're going to look and see if that stuff matches up. Now, one of the other things that they might ask you for is they may ask you in the application process to provide for them a verification of income. Don't get nervous, don't get upset. They're asking for that because they have to make sure that you're able to show you can afford the apartment. Coming up with the security deposit and the first month's rent is just part of it. You're going to be signing most likely a lease, and you're going to be making monthly payments on that particular unit that you're going to be living in, and the landlord wants to make sure you have the ability with all your other debts to afford that property. Doesn't do any good for you to rent a property, move in, and then all of a sudden see that you can't afford the monthly payment on the rent. Doesn't help the landlord out, doesn't help you out, and can cause other problems down the road. Let's sit back and take a look at this little quick presentation, and I'll be back to talk more about renting. recently was in a conversation with some folks, and we were talking about renting properties and what can a landlord ask a potential tenant and what can they not, and what kind of information should a tenant tell a landlord. Well, let's look at this two ways. Let's first talk about the information you might tell a landlord. Most everything that you say, if it has to do with your credit or it has to do with your job or income, is going to be verified. So don't puff. Don't elaborate or make it sound bigger than what it actually is. If you earn XYZ amount of dollars per month, that's what you earn. Don't tell them more or less. Tell them that amount. In fact, you don't even have to discuss your income because you're going to be verifying that either through paycheck stubs or bank statements or whatever it might be to show the landlord what your income is. Things that the landlord may ask you is they're going to ask you, where are you coming from? How long have you worked in the area? Why are you looking to rent here? Things along those lines, just to kind of get to know you a little bit. But they have to be very careful because there are fair housing rules and regulations, and there are things they cannot ask you, especially if you're a member of what they call a protected class. You don't want to volunteer too much information to the landlord. You know, we're all people. We love to talk. If you watched the real estate show before, you know that Rick likes to talk. Bottom line simply is that sometimes in the course of a conversation, especially when we're making an application for something, we'll say too much, or we may trigger something that causes the individual we're talking to want to investigate further. So I'm not saying be put offish. I'm saying that try to be as truthful as you possibly can when you're looking at an apartment and when you're looking to make an application. And fill out the form as completely as possible. Now, some places are going to charge what they call an application or credit background fee. Now, this fee can be anywhere from $50 or above. There's nothing wrong with that. Bottom line simply is somebody somewhere has to do the research and the analysis and the presentation to the landlord, and they need to be compensated for their time. So there is a fee. Just like with any business, there's going to be a fee as far as that's concerned. Just be aware that those fees are application fees, usually, most of the time, non-refundable fees. In other words, you pay that fee, you make the application, they do their processing, and if you're not accepted, you're out as far as that fee is concerned. Now, let's talk about the first month's payment and the security deposit. Usually what will happen in the case of an apartment is you will pay those fees upon acceptance of your credit and background search and your agreement to enter into a lease with the landlord on the unit that you're looking to rent. Now, that can be paid before the lease starts. It can be paid at when the lease starts, and that is a discussion that you're going to have between you and the representative or you and the landlord as far as when you're going to actually sign that lease. I highly recommend that one of the things that you do as a tenant is before you sign the lease and before you secure the place you're looking to rent, you take a couple of moments to do what I call a walkthrough. Now, walkthroughs are very popular when you're buying a house. And what I mean by that is before you go to the actual closing, you're going to go with your realtor to the house and you're going to walk through it to make sure everything that was discussed about that house is with the house. In other words, if it's coming with a washer and dryer, the washer and dryer is there, etc., refrigerator, stove, or whatever it might be. You want to do the same thing when you're either renting a house or renting an apartment. You want to take a moment to do a walkthrough to make sure that you're clear on what's included and what is included. And make sure that those things are also included in your lease. Sometimes you're going to rent a place. It may include heat. It may include electricity. It may include a certain amenity like a laundry room or whatever it might be. You want to make sure that those things are all explained to you and you get to know what you're actually agreeing to before you sign the lease. Any good realtor, any honest landlord or property manager is going to take the time to walk through the lease with you, explain to it what it says, so that you're comfortable in signing it. And one other piece of advice I'd like to give: when you do sign a lease, make sure you get a copy, because you want to be able to refer back to that should there be any concerns or problems in the future. Let's take a look at this, and I'll be back to talk more about rentals. Some tenants are not aware that your stuff that's in your apartment is your stuff. It's not the landlord's stuff unless you abandon it when you leave. Bottom line is the landlord or the owner of the property is going to insure the building and the common areas. They don't insure your personal property. Now, when you're living in a multi-unit building, either a multi-family house or an apartment building or whatever it might be, I advise that you seek some kind of insurance. They call it a rental insurance policy to just cover your personal property. And this is there just in case you should experience a number of different things because you're in a multi-unit. You can't vouch for the living style or the behavior of your neighbors. So if you have common walls and something happens next door, like a fire or water damage, and it causes damage to your unit, you want to make sure that your personal stuff is covered. And from what I know, those insurance policies are not all that expensive, but it's worth the peace of mind to have that. Another thing that you want to make sure that you do when you're renting a unit is you want to make sure that you're secure. And what I mean by secure is I have always asked the landlords to change the locks when they go to a new tenant. This is just in case the previous tenant still has keys. When we live in a space, sometimes we give a key out. We give it to our parents, we give it to a friend, we give it to a brother or a sister or whatever, because we want somebody to have access to our unit should we need help. And we forget that we have those keys that are out there. You may have lost some keys. You may have had keys stolen and so on and so forth. So when you're moving into the unit, it's not an unreasonable request to ask the landlord to put in new locks for you so you have a fresh set of keys. If by chance they decide they're not going to do that for you, you have to remember you cannot do any modifications to the apartment or rental space without the approval of the landlord. So you might say to them, well, if you won't change the locks out, can I buy a new lock set and have it installed? They may agree to that, but you have to provide them with a key because they reserve the right to enter the unit for inspections or for emergencies if needed. Let's take a look at this and we'll be back with some final thoughts on rentals. Okay, so you found the place, you decided to rent it, you've gone through the application process, the landlord's reviewed everything, you've supplied all the information that they need to make a decision, you've come to the agreement, you've signed your lease, and now you're going to move in. You hope that you're going to have a wonderful stay and that you're going to make your rent payments on time and that the place you've chosen to live is going to fulfill your needs for whatever those needs might be for that moment in time. But what happens if something goes wrong? What do you do, for instance, if you're renting an apartment and you lose your job and you no longer can make the rent payments, or there's a life change that requires that you need to do something and you're signed on a lease? Remember that a lease is a contract. You're agreeing to rent a space or a property for a specific amount of time. Usually the term is 1 year. Commercial could be longer, but usually in a residential it's a 1 year process. The landlord has the right to enforce the lease itself. In other words, you've agreed to make 12 payments of whatever amount it might be. If you need to break that lease, there are ways to do it. There are right ways and there are wrong ways. And you need to discuss those so that you're not liable for the balance of the rest of the lease payments on that specific lease. This is a portion of the real estate show called the Real Estate Mailbag. It allows us the opportunity to address questions or make comments that are set here to the real estate show, and to just talk about the topic that we happen to be presenting. And of course, on this show, I've been talking about rentals. A lot of questions come up with, well, what do I do if I put in applications for several different places and get accepted in several different places? Am I obligated to follow through? No, you're not. The bottom line simply is you can put applications in on a number of different places, and if your credit is where the landlord's looking for it to be and you verified your income, and you get accepted in a couple of different places, it's going to be your choice as to which one you're going to follow up on and eventually sign a lease. I will give you this piece of advice though. You don't want to have your information out all over the place. Remember, we have a lot of problems with identity theft. So you want to make sure that any information that you're sharing, whether it's information that's on an application, a credit authorization, a credit report, paycheck stubs, whatever it might be, that those are going to be kept confidential by whoever you're giving those to. Don't ever fill out an application in a unit and leave it behind so that it's open for anyone else to take a look at. The reason why I say that is I once went to an event. It was a new apartment complex. They were having an introduction day, kind of like an open house, where they're inviting people to come in and walk through the apartments. All the doors to the different units were open and people were just coming. They were being greeted in the lobby and then they were being allowed to walk through the building and look through the apartments. When they came back down to the lobby, there was a stack of applications for those apartments where they would fill out their name, their phone number, and the unit that they were interested in, and then they would fill out some general information. They would leave that information behind. And I noticed when I happened to walk in that in this particular case, and this is a few years ago, there were several applications left on a table where I was able to see people's addresses and their names, their phone numbers, and so on and so forth. It's none of my business. I'm another potential tenant. But that should have been collected by whoever was running that particular situation and kept out of sight so no one else can see it. My name is Rick Naples. This has been the Real Estate Show. I thank you very much for watching. Catch you next time.